Good afternoon. How gratifying to see all of you.
Good
Uh,
afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. So lovely to see all of you, even though I know that the reason there's so many of you is because we've compressed the tutorial schedule this week. Um, okay, so let's get started. I want to check in, how are you guys doing? Just sort of generally, like first off, right? So how are you doing? Good, 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 great. Okay, good. Um, and I want to check in and see what you guys feel like you learned in last week's lecture. So what did we learn last week? What do you feel like you got out of it? And then we'll move on to what you felt like wasn't clear. I'm doing okay. Thanks for asking. So, multiple and successive causes, the doctrine of causation, right? So these are absolutely correct. Okay. How do you guys feel about that? Do you feel like it's relatively clear? Simultaneous cause was a piece of the puzzle. Yep.
I think it was clear, but I'll have to do some more like reading to fully
Mm-hmm.
understand it.
Okay. Anything else, guys? No? Okay. Then let's get started with this week's tutorial question. And the question is, I'm going to put it in the chat for you, for those of you who are more visually oriented. So it is, be prepared to discuss the ways in which policy considerations shape the definition of the duty of care. So remember, this is reaching back 2 weeks. Okay, so first piece of this puzzle is we have to figure out what policy considerations are. So what do we mean when we talk about policy considerations in this context?
Like the principles on which a tort action should be decided on.
Close, right? That because that sounds to me like it could describe policy considerations, but it also could just describe the elements of the tort. So what's a way that we can describe policy considerations and what we mean when we talk about them so that we know that that's all that we're talking about? Colette says, what laws are in place? So how is that different from the elements of the tort? So a private message says how it ought to be. And I think that's closer, right? And silence is fine. Silence is very frequently the sound of thinking. So I don't mind silence. Um, so okay.
When if I could respond to your question, sir,
Yeah,
are we
yeah.
also talking about matters that may affect the society at large in some particular way when we talk about policy considerations?
That's exactly right, right? Policy considerations are issues that the court sees with future cases from the various decisions that they are being asked to make. So the parties have their preferred outcomes, right? They're arguing why the authority points to that particular outcome. One of the things that the court is going to ask is, if we find for the claimant, how does this affect, how will the arguments offered affect future cases? If we find for the respondent, same deal, right? So, sorry, I'm just managing one of the things that is going on here is that I'm managing a lot of moving parts with all of you guys in here and running the waiting room and folks chatting with me, sending me private messages. And so sometimes it may look like my attention is all over the place, and it is. Okay, but yes, that's exactly what we mean by policy considerations, is we're interested in how judges evaluate the next case through the lens of this case. Michael, that's exactly right. Michael says it's like a what are the consequences of my actions question. That's exactly right. Okay, so if you think back to the Toombs case, right? The doctor relies very strongly on this earlier authority called McKay. Okay, and if you remember, in McKay, the judges were unwilling to impose a duty of care because, under the facts that McKay presented, imposing a duty of care would mean that there were circumstances where doctors would recommend an abortion for no reason other than to shield themselves from liability. And the judges said, that's not a policy we're prepared to implement, right? And so, we're going to set aside the question of whether they were right or wrong about that. It was 1982. Public attitudes toward abortion were different than they are in 2020. The sort of breakdown of opinion was different. So you can agree with that analysis. You can disagree with it. I don't care. You are allowed to believe what you believe in this class, but that's the argument that the court makes, and that is a policy consideration. Okay? So what are some ways in which these considerations shape the boundaries of the duty of care, right? What are some things that we've seen in reading the cases where the judges draw on policy considerations to determine the boundaries of the duty of care? Naomi says that insurance providers are the one to pay damages in for example, road accidents. Can you expand on that a little bit? So can you make that connection to the duty of care in a little bit?
Okay, let me gather my thoughts.
Sure. While you're thinking, Sarah Ann, you unmute, or Sasha Ann, you unmuted. Feel free to jump in with your thoughts.
So whether it's for pure economic loss or you asked a specific question, like what are some of the, can you repeat it? The considerations?
Sure. What are the ways in which policy considerations shape
you
the
asked something
boundaries?
just now. You asked another question just that the other student was responding to. I kind of forgot what you asked. But my response was going to be, one of the things they will look at is whether it is for pure if it's for pure economic reasons.
Yep, those losses are harder to prove in negligence, right? There's an additional step, right? You have to show the existence of the negligent misstatement and the special relationship.
Right, but what I was going to say is that the considerations, but if you're saying that it's for pure economic, if it was deemed that it was for pure economic reasons, those kind of situations generally are not given a lot of consideration, because then you have to, the court then looks at whether or not it really is for the greater good. Because if you look at only pure economic reasons, it would open the floodgates for too many people to probably try to make those same claims.
And that's exactly, I actually just received a private message that says almost exactly that. So let me acknowledge that person, that they also had the same thought, but I think that's absolutely right. And for those who missed it in the chat, Mark said something very helpful, quoting from the Quinn and Elliott book. Policy reasons simply mean that the judges take into account not just the legal framework, but also whether they believe society would benefit from the existence of a duty. And that's exactly it, right? Is that does the imposition of a duty serve a beneficial societal purpose in this circumstance? So you guys will think back to the Walnut Mound case, right? This is the case where we had this sort of Rube Goldberg process where the ship discharged oil into the harbor and they sort of expected it to be carried away from the wharf. And then they were doing welding to do some repairs on the ship and sparks flew. And the oil had not been carried away by the harbor, and the sparks flew on the through the air and landed on the oil and ignited it and destroyed the wharf. And they were trying to hold the ship's owners liable. And the court basically said, you know, this is a new duty and these events are so unlikely to recur that there's just no benefit to imposing a duty here. Right? So this is exactly what we're talking about when we refer to that. Okay? So what questions do you guys have about this? Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
I also like the Mark Rich case, sir, in terms of demonstrating the whole issue of policy considerations. This is the case where the ship Severe ultimately was an action was brought against them because of the ship having sank and the cargo in the tune of $6 million was destroyed, and the policy issues that was before the court in this particular case was that they thought that if they had decided in favor of the claimant, then it would have had a significant effect on the cost of insurance for matters like this, but also that surveyors in the future may be a bit reluctant to take up the roles of surveying because they, would think that they're exposing themselves to significant liability, and that's not what they wanted. They did not want that in the course of ships, transporting, that they will not be able to have the relevant surveying done.
So this is absolutely right? So this is a case where the court sort of explicitly says, if we find in favor of the claimant here, we will make it economically impossible to continue the trade of the respondent. Like not just for the respondent, we won't just bankrupt the respondent, but we will actually destroy the industry. Now, do we have to agree with that conclusion? No, I think that there is ample evidence that the transactional lawyers are very clever at avoiding the pit, at getting people to sign away the rights to recovery that they might have, right? So I think that this is one of those examples where a court had the outcome that it wanted and then reasoned backwards toward premises that would lead to that conclusion. So Mark, can you put the name of the case in the chat for everybody? Because I didn't quite hear it, and I know the case you're talking about, but I can't remember the name. So if you could put the name in the case. Mark Rich and Company AG versus Bishop Rock Marine Company Limited. Thank you. I have a private message that a policy is a principle by definition. So simply put, it's a consideration for the potential setting of principles of a society. Why do you say that a policy is a principle? And you're welcome to send me that privately as well. So.
Okay, will do.
Sorry, that comment was directed at the person who private messaged me. So you're welcome to private message your answer to that question as well.
Could you repeat your question, sir?
Sure. So the question is, why do you say that a policy is a principle by definition? And again, this is directed to a specific person who private messaged me.
Is the question for all of us, or are you?
I want to give the person who sent it to me an opportunity to answer, but certainly you're welcome to think about it, and then we can, we'll open it up in a minute. So this person, whom I will not out, sees it as a principle because policies are byproducts of a certain way of thinking, which ultimately become principles. They guide a people in a particular direction. Okay, I see that argument. I think that seems to me to be something that happens over a fairly long time frame. And policy is done in the moment, right? So there's always the possibility that policy needs to change. And it takes time for policy to sort of acquire the stability that it can become sort of a principle. So I don't think you're wrong. I think that the timescales operate differently than than even courts do. So I would, anyway, yeah. It seems to me that maybe what you wanted to say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, But maybe what you wanted to say is that principle should become policy rather than policy being principle, right? So it's a prescriptive statement. So we acknowledge that the world is not perfect, but this is what we want to guide policy making. Would you disagree with that, or do you think that I'm barking up the wrong tree? Private message asking me to explain what I mean by that. Okay. So we have these like principles that are part of how we think society ought to be ordered. Okay, they can be moral, they can be legal, they can be rational, right? There doesn't have to be just one thing that can be a principle. In general, we should want these beliefs of how society ought to be ordered to inform our policymaking choices. That's what I think I'm trying to suggest. And I will let those who are speaking to me privately sort of digest that for a second and tell me if they think I'm right. The rest of you who are, sort of speaking out in the open, you're welcome to explain to me all the ways in which I'm wrong. So someone has privately said, I think it goes hand in hand because we are creatures of habit, so our customs become frameworks by which the law is developed. I don't disagree with that, except for the part where it's implied that those things don't change, right? And they are mutually constructive. Okay, so customs create law, but law can also create customs. Okay, so
Could you explain it, please?
so what I was about to say is that, we can enact laws that are intended to reflect customary practices, but we can also enact laws that we want to create customary practices. So, for example, right, and this is so for example, right, we can enact a law that we can sort of build law around the status quo where people who are in wheelchairs just have to struggle along and nobody is required to provide an accessible environment for them. Okay, that is the custom, right? We see, 4-foot high counters in stores, and every sidewalk on the island has a curb, right? I think I might have seen 25 curb cuts on the whole island. I haven't been everywhere, but I've been a lot of places. Or we can enact a law that says that public accommodations and public entities have to provide a physical space that is accessible to the disabled. So there has to be a low counter so that someone in a wheelchair can come up and can see over it and can interact with the salesperson. Sidewalks have to have curb cuts. Okay. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that I'm talking about when I say that custom can create law, right? We can have a world where the disabled are sort of forgotten, right? Or we can enact a law that creates an affirmative duty to include them in our planning. So do you see what I mean by how law and custom are a feedback loop?
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay.
But the point I was trying to make was that in terms of a policy being a principle, it's that even if you I understand your point about it being the timeline, but what I was thinking about was that judges in that sense are thinking about that particular principle future. But even so, they will still have a set of principles by which they would think about the futuristic repercussions of the actions or the decisions in court. So when I say policy is principle by definition, that both ways from before they make the decision and to thinking about the decision that they're going to make is all either governed by principle or trying to enact a principle which they think is better for the society.
I can, now that I see sort of how you're unpacking the idea, this makes sense, right? And I'm not sure that you and I are as far apart as maybe both of us thought we were. So I think that makes sense. That again, right? These are cases where judges are acting in ways that are informed by their own preferences, by their own ideas of what the ideal society should look like. And you can think, you know, this isn't directed just at Michael. You can think that that's a great thing, right? That judges should be sort of actively engaged in thinking about policy, or you can think that this is awful and we should never want judges who do that. And both of those are valid approaches to sort of the normative component of judicial decision making.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, so what questions do you guys have about this? Do you understand sort of the abstract notion of how these prescriptive questions about what kind of world do we want to have affect the boundaries of the duty of care? What questions do you have about that?
Excuse me, can you repeat, please?
Sure. So this is this abstract notion, right? This is what we've been talking about at this very sort of high level, 30,000 foot understanding of this is how policy considerations, which are ideas about the way the world ought to be, okay, how those ideas inform how courts analyze the duty of care. So do we understand that? What questions do you have about it? A private message that would it not be subject to bias? Absolutely. Absolutely. But what kind of bias? Right? Because a bias for a better world is, I hope, one that every judge shares. But if you don't like, if you think that judges are likely to get that wrong, or that judges, that for democratic reasons, you're not on board with judges who aren't democratically accountable having that kind of power, then maybe you prefer that judges not engage in that sort of decision making. But that's a whole different ball of wax. But it's absolutely a source of bias. But you may be okay with it. Another, and yeah, right. So same person has messaged me that everyone has different values, and that may be why you may not be comfortable with giving judges this power, right? You may feel like the net of biases that you get are likely to shape society in ways that you think are wrong. And then you may be uncomfortable with this.
Sir, isn't it sometimes a question of the majority? Because if we look at society as a whole, I doubt there's ever going to be a decision made by anyone that everybody in the society will agree with. But if you say, for example, the majority of people prefer to have coffee in the morning, and that has become and that has become a judge-made law, but obviously the people that don't prefer coffee in the morning, they would think that that's bad law. But if 90% of the people prefer coffee, then isn't it a question of the majority in that sense?
So this is where we start getting into issues of the legitimacy of the judicial system deriving from the ways in which judges are selected. And Michael's argument, by the way, is basically why, if I remember correctly, it's about 2/3 of the American states elect some or all of their judges. They've decided that they want their judges to be democratically accountable, and they have chosen to have them be selected in elections of one sort or another. So I have a private message that I think is really, really helpful. One thing that we can ask in these things is a better world for whom, right? And trying to confer duties and rights on one person, right? This may cause them to feel ambushed, and they must always be thinking about what could go wrong. I think that's right. I think that's a correct statement of a consequence to this, right? These are pieces of the puzzle that we have to be thinking about. Okay. So private message asking, can we examine how a question like this could be structured or broken down? I mean, the answer to that is yes, but probably not today. I would need to sort of figure out how I would want you to do that before I could begin to teach you. One of the things that, and one of the things that concerns me more broadly about this is it seems to me that a lot of students at this university are very interested in being told exactly what they need to say in order to succeed in a class. And the vast, and this may not, I may be barking up the wrong tree over this, but it made me think of this, and it's worth, I think I've said it before in this class, but it's worth reiterating. I am not super concerned about what the details of your answers are. I am concerned with how you reason your way to whatever conclusion you reach. And so there are lots of paths that you can walk to get to the right answer. And I am really hesitant to say, this is, damn it, this is the way. I feel like I should be wearing a helmet.
Sir,
But
in fairness,
go ahead, Michael. I'm sorry.
in fairness, that's kind of, well, I'm speaking for myself because when we, not even just at university level, but coming up through the education system in Barbados, it has always been that for me. Like sometimes I would feel a little stifled in terms of the whole reasoning element of stuff, but teachers are very strict when it comes to a syllabus. Actually, no, CXC, our examining body, is very strict when it comes to syllabus. This is what they want, they spell it out. And if you do not get that, if you do not put that on the paper, they won't give you the mark. And because a lot of teachers mark CXC as well, mark CXC papers, they tell us exactly what to put on the paper. So it's like you're being spoon-fed, we're being given the information, and you can't really deviate from that. Then when you get to UB level now, a lot of the times when we deviate or when we apply reasoning to what the material is or whatever the case may be, sometimes you kind of feel like all right, you know what, I need to listen to exactly what the lecturer is telling me, because if not, the lecturer is going to fail me in this course or whatever. Nobody wants to fail. So
Yeah.
so as kind of a safety net, you say, okay, sir or ma'am, what do you want? So I could give you that. So that even if we get into practice and we feel like we can reason it, oh, at least we already get the LLB. Because at this point in time, it's just putting what the lecturer wants on the paper, and then we could work with that stuff later on.
Right. And believe me, I understand where you're coming from. I have been in your shoes, right? And I really appreciate you sort of being this open with me about where you guys are coming from. I want you to know that you can talk to me about these things. I'm not that kind of lecturer. Go ahead, Joanne.
So it starts from primary, actually, Michael. It starts from primary, and especially in Barbados, let me speak to Barbados, and you were taught to just to listen. So you're passive receivers of information. So children that are normally deemed as chatty and having their own opinion are ridiculed within the classroom setting at a primary level. So when it moves from there into secondary, and then you are told, okay, this is what we want, we have to show that there's a high pass rate within the school, because it becomes very competitive. The competition starts from primary school, and that is structured that way to see which is the better primary school. So when that moves from there, you go into secondary, and secondary then has, depending on what secondary school you're at, then it is also measured based on if you put in the information that is correct, you are assured a pass. Then you come to university, and the university says to you, you have not written any book, and therefore you must sit here and be passive again as an adult, receive the information. So you have a mentality like this. I just want to get out of here. So you gain the information, and then when you leave the institution, then you have to battle through why on earth, how am I supposed to adapt information in order to survive within the society?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying I'm sorry that that's what you guys go through. That certainly, I hope you can see that in my class, that's not how I operate. I am absolutely interested in the way you guys think, and yeah, I'm gonna tell you, look, this is what the authorities say. But if you read the authorities differently than I do, then I am not the God of law. I am more than happy to be in this uncertainty with you, right? Because this I think is one of the most important things for us, for you, is to remember that law is uncertain, right? Law is contingent. And And that's, that's the ultimate situation, is that until a judge says, this is the ruling in this case, it could go either way. And sometimes the likelihood is better for one side than the other, right? It's not a 50-50 probability, but there's always a chance, however small. And our job as lawyers, right, is to find the chance for our side and to make it as large as we can.
I think that's the interesting thing about studying law, because like there are a couple people who I guess you could say, vent to when we are doing certain assignments or whatever the case may be. And I would be able to pick up these different little things like, okay, how is this true? Like sometimes it will really confuse me, because in my point of view, it's like this ruling was absolutely retarded. And then other times it will be like, okay. And then when you read the cases for sometimes too, you go through, you're like, okay, so this particular person did not think that they needed to add in this other piece of information so that I could actually get their point. And so when you are told now to read like 16, 17 cases or whatever, for me, it takes me a couple times before I can actually understand one fully. But because it's going so quickly, you have this false sense of like, if you stupid, right? And like I was even speaking to somebody yesterday, and they were saying that everybody feels like that. And I was like, but doesn't anybody see that as a problem? Like, we're asked to read through all these cases and and we have to spend so much time trying to figure out what the people were saying and then apply it, and battle with our own views on this particular topic. And then some things that people write, if only the legal professionals would be able to understand this material, and I'm not a legal professional yet. So it's all those different little things. And then that coupled with the fact that you are relying on a lecturer for information is not the easiest.
I will tell you a couple of stories relative to that. One of which was literally something that happened today in one of my earlier classes. The student, I was asking a student, it was a tutorial, a non-torts tutorial. So I didn't design it. And maybe you guys would prefer that. You don't have to answer that. But the student was being asked to present a case, and the student had accurately zoomed in on sort of the key language in the case. But then they just read that key language out. And I'm sorry, no disrespect intended to their lordships, but the House of Lords and the UK Supreme Court and the Privy Council are really long-winded. And she read off 2-3 paragraphs of text, and it was correct. This was the part of the judgment that she needed to be drawing on. And I said, can you explain what that says in your own words? And in her own words, what it said was, are deadlines jurisdictional? That's it. So this is, so translating the language of the judgment into plain English is something that's been a movement in legal education for some time, but things are lagged in the legal system. And so what we're trying to do for you guys is set you up so that 30 years from now, when one of you is the Chief Justice of Barbados or the Chief Justice of the CCJ, that you can write judgments so that the generations coming up behind you are better off. Okay. And the other story that I want to tell you is from when I was in law school, and the very first case we read in my constitutional law case was, the facts of it don't matter, but I remember reading the opinion, and it was by Hugo Black, who was an alumnus of the law school I went to. And he rattled off 10 different reasons for why this is all I'm going to say. He rattled off 10 different reasons for why.
No, sir, I wasn't meaning not that you
No,
were
no, no.
doing any-
You're because I told you to remind me.
No, what I was saying was because when you were talking about how long cases are, and I was saying, and I was in agreement, constitutional law is something else.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But Justice Black takes 10 different reasons why the claimant should win and then finds for the respondent. Why? I've never understood to this day. Okay. So we don't necessarily understand where we're coming from here. That what the judges are doing is fundamentally an exercise of power. Okay. And in some cases, the law is just like this facade of rationality. Judges do love talking, so do professors. But the key piece of this, right, the thing that I want you to take away from this whole conversation is that I can't speak for my colleagues. I'm not going to criticize them because they have their approaches. But in this classroom, your opinion and your thoughts matter. And even when I disagree with them, I want to hear them and I want to hear how you arrive at them so that we can work together to build an understanding that leads you to grasp the conclusions that the courts have reached. Okay? So that's what I want from you in this class. Can't speak for what my colleagues want from you, and I'm not going to say that what they want from you is wrong. But this is what you need to be prepared to deliver here. Okay? Yeah, go ahead, Kayla.
Sorry, I don't mean to cross you or anything. But it's just like, for me personally, the whole online school also makes it harder because it's like you can't just go to a lecture afterwards and be like, sir, I didn't understand this part. Can you just explain again? And it's just like you're the first lecture to actually like go on to a different topic outside of just the coursework to help us understand. Like when we're in classes, when we're in lectures and even tutorials, they would just talk about that particular topic. But then if you come to ask another question about a topic from before, they'll be like, but that's not what we're covering this week. So
yeah, it's I think for me, and again, I'm not criticizing my colleagues, but I see the law as a whole. And so the pieces of it, like, they fit together. And if you're confused about something that we've discussed earlier, well, we need to clarify that because that's going to help you understand what we're talking about now. And also, it is what we're talking about now, right? This is all of a piece. And that's how I conceive of the law more generally. Also, to be perfectly frank, as you may have gathered from my lecture notes, I don't script every word that I say. And so responding to your questions helps me know what you need to hear to understand the material.
Sir, I would also add to Kayla and say, I think that, well, 2 points. One is that the lecturers themselves, are also trained to follow a particular time frame to get all the information in. So then now, I think that a lot of the times they're trying to meet their own deadlines. At the same end, it is counterproductive because in trying to meet other deadlines, they're not taking the relevant time to make sure that everybody understands exactly what they're saying. Because you're dealing with 100 and something people on a Zoom call. Not everybody will understand at the beginning, and then a lot of them give you a hard time when you don't. Like you have people telling you that you need to do more reading when you can't even handle the reading that you got in the first place because they give you everything, and then the portion of what they discuss in lectures is not even remotely close to the amount of information that they've given you, right? So, and then that fear, so to speak, because I don't really be afraid. I just be like, all right, well, I just try and avoid little conflict. But that fear, so to speak, of asking for assistance when you have moved on is kind of like, you know what? And because it builds all the time, you find that there are gaps in your logic, there are gaps in your reasoning because you don't understand the concept from before. And then even as I left last semester, I still have to go back to some legal systems and criminal law notes because there are concepts from then that I need to use in constitutional law and criminal law too that I still don't understand. So, and why should I be doing that? No, especially when I'm going to have criminal law to work for an exam this semester. It's just more and more and more of everything.
Yeah, and just to revisit one thing that Kayla said that I want to touch on, which is that I don't think any of us like Zoom law school. Nobody likes it. I know, I hear you when you guys say you hate it. I hate it. I think all of my colleagues hate it. The administration hates it. The governments hate it, right? Everybody hates it. But unfortunately, we're trying to keep ourselves and the community safe, and this is part of it. Rightly or wrongly. And that's a great question. What if it is here for longer than we all think it probably will be?
At this point, I'm so COVID out. Like, I'm just so COVID fatigued. Like, at this,
Yeah.
I don't even want to say that I don't care. But, like, at this point, if I get it, I get it. I cannot deal with it anymore. Like, these four walls I've been looking at for the last year and I'm sick of it. Like, there's a spot right there that's bothering me that's not moving. I need to get out of the house, man.
I understand, right? It is. I think, yeah. I mean, I'm seeing in the chat, right? We're all in the same boat. So I get what you're going through. Linrick, you're off mute.
Yes,
Did you have
sir.
something? Go ahead.
Right, sir. So I just wanted to just come in here. My general concern or main concern was strategy. How could I was trying to understand what you would want or what you see as being salient, what was paramount. And you just said it, you spoke it, and your expectations. I'll give you an instance. Like yesterday, I prepared an essay for my tutorial in another class. And as the tutor went through, I saw that I had the points, but a lot that I had also was fluff, right? So that is why I wanted to feel you out, and I believe that's the whole, just to see what you see as being salient, what you really need, what you're looking at, the points that you want us to zero in on, and what's not.
And this is absolutely like one of the major challenges in reading judgments without some significant editing, is figuring out what is actually the important part of it. I think that that's a serious problem. I don't know. I think I certainly have my opinions about sort of broader issues, but I am but one lecturer at one university in one place. And so certainly I do not have a lot of information about how things work sort of across the board. I just have my own experiences and my own research and insight to the things that I've seen and the things that I have been told. So I'm sorry that this has not been what you came from, what you expected, and what you sort of were led to believe your educational experience would be like. By the way, we are past time, so nobody has to stick around. So you're more than welcome to head out if you need to. So,
Sir, another thing though, no, you'll see that, and the others will get to understand too, that in practice, you can go to court and you can come before a judge who would tell you get to the point. The judge would, would want you to zero in on a particular issue or something, get to the point. So I believe in understanding, or like the question that was asked earlier in relation to how do you answer the question, I believe knowing what would be salient, what would be the areas that you need to zero in on would be crucial, especially even in later practice, if you understand what I'm saying.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I did not know how it is with flow.
Oh, you missed my question. All right.
Yeah, I did. I missed your question, Lenrick. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I had just referenced the fact that at some point in time, we may all appear before a court where you can get a judge who would let you know that you need to get to the point.
Yep.
Judge,
absolutely true.
Yeah, judge will and very serious about it. He or she will direct you that you need to get on with what you're doing. So I'm saying that knowing from this point what would be salient, what would be the necessary points that you need to make, and the strategy use I think is crucial.
Yeah. One thing that I always used to tell my moot court students back when I was a moot court coach mumble years ago is that if all else is equal, right? Same quality of argument, quality of rhetoric, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The person who says the fewest words wins. And I believe that. And I think that's been, borne out in some of my practice experience. If you are spinning your wheels and, talking around issues, judges are not dumb. Most judges are not dumb. They're going to see that what you're trying to do is avoid something. And they're going to sort of zero in on it. And probably it's the thing you don't want them looking at. So the way that I was trained to argue a case is to think of it as a game of darts. Just doop, 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 right? 3 or 4 points, sit your butt down. Clearly, when I was trained, the lawyer did not say but. So do you guys feel like you have a better handle on sort of how to approach studying, maybe at least for this class, but hopefully for others as well?
I do.
Okay. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about? There was one person who wanted to have a private conversation, so I'll stick around so that they can be the last one out the door. So if there's nothing else, then go ahead and make your exit. I'm not going to shut down the Zoom because, like I said, there was this one student who wanted to chat. So,
sir, I want to get into your office hours next week.
Yep, they're on the syllabus, the link is on e-learning. It's just drop in, so just come on by anytime. I am going to be meeting with the dean at some point during that time period. So obviously he's going to be my priority if he's in the room. But other than that, it's just first come, first serve.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So what's up, Colleen?
Hi. Good afternoon, Dr. Crow. I guess you don't have to keep this a part of the recording, but
Oh, let me.